Hey everyone, welcome back to Grandpa English Channel. It is great to be here with you all again.
Hi, everyone. It is good to be back.
So, Lisa, how are you today? How has your week been?
I am doing well, Tom. Thanks. Honestly, I have been a little bit busy. I feel like I'm running around everywhere lately. Work, family, you know how it is. But I finally sat down with a cup of coffee this morning, and it felt amazing. Just 10 minutes of quiet. How about you?
I know that feeling. My week was actually pretty calm for once. I spent a lot of time just reading. I realized I haven't read a real book in a while, so I picked one up. But, I also spent a lot of time reading the news online, which is, well, it is always interesting.
Interesting is a polite word for it. I feel like every time I open a news app, I see 5 different versions of the same story. It can be really confusing.
Exactly. That is actually what I was thinking about this morning. It's fascinating how the media paints pictures of people. You can read one article about a public figure and they sound like a hero. Then you read another article from a different website and they sound like a villain.
That is so true. It really depends on who's telling the story, doesn't it? And sometimes it depends on when the story is being told.
Right. Time changes everything. Information comes out slowly. I think one of the most complex examples of this, and I know this is a serious topic, is the story of Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, wow. Yes, that is a very heavy topic. But you're right. If you look at how he was discussed in the 1990s versus how he is discussed today, it's like looking at 2 completely different people.
Exactly. And I think that is why it's important to talk about it, not to gossip and definitely not to focus on the terrible things that happened in a graphic way, but to look at how the story developed. How did someone like that exist in the public eye for so long?
I agree. It's a lesson in media literacy. We need to understand how narratives or stories are built. So, where should we even start? The ending of the story is so famous now, but the beginning was very different.
I think we have to start with the image he built. For a long time, Jeffrey Epstein was presented simply as a financier. That was the word everyone used. If you looked at newspapers from the 1990s or early 2000s, he was this mysterious, wealthy man who knew everyone.
Yes, mysterious is the key word. I remember reading that he didn't give many interviews. He liked that people didn't know exactly where his money came from. It made him seem more important in a way. He started out as a teacher, didn't he?
He did. He taught at a private school in New York for a short time, teaching math and physics, but he didn't stay there long. He moved into banking pretty quickly. He worked at Bear Stearns, which was a huge investment bank.
And he was successful there, right?
Apparently, yes, he moved up very fast, but then he started his own firm, and this is where the media narrative gets interesting. He only managed money for people who had $1 billion or more, or at least that's what he told people.
See, that's part of the image. By saying, I only work with billionaires, he made himself seem exclusive. It made people want to be around him. He wasn't just a money manager, he was a connector. He brought people together.
Right, and think about the names connected to him back then. We're talking about scientists, politicians, even royalty. He organized these conferences and dinners. The media covered these events. They would show pictures of him standing next to Nobel Prize winners or presidents.
When you see photos like that, you assume the person is legitimate. You think, well, if the president is talking to him, he must be a good guy. He must be trustworthy. It acts as a shield.
That's a great way to put it, a shield. His connections protected his reputation. But Lisa, while the magazines were calling him a man of mystery and praising his science philanthropy, there were other things happening that weren't on the front page.
You mean the legal side of things?
Yes, this is where we have to look at the other perspective. The public image was wealthy genius, but the private reality, according to later police reports and court documents, was very different.
It's interesting because those 2 worlds existed at the same time for years. He was buying big properties, the island in the Caribbean, the huge house in New York, the ranch in New Mexico. To the public, these were just signs of success.
Exactly. But to investigators later on, these properties were part of a pattern. But before we get to the investigations, we should mention another person who was crucial to his image, Ghislaine Maxwell.
Right, that is a name that everyone knows now, but back then she was known for something else. She was the daughter of Robert Maxwell.
And Robert Maxwell was a massive figure in the media world, wasn't he?
He was huge. He owned newspapers and publishing companies in the UK. He was extremely powerful. So Ghislaine grew up in high society. She knew everyone. When she came to New York after her father died, she brought that network with her.
So, when she connected with Epstein, she gave him access to a world he maybe couldn't enter on his own. She made him socially acceptable to the British upper class and New York society.
Exactly. It's reported that she was the one who introduced him to many of the famous people he was seen with. She smoothed the path for him. So you have this combination, his money, or the appearance of money, and her social connections. It was a powerful mix.
It was. And for a long time, the media focused on that glamour. They wrote about the parties, they wrote about his science projects. But then, around 2005, the narrative started to crack.
This is when the authorities in Florida got involved, correct?
Yes, this is really the first time the general public might have seen a different headline. Police in Palm Beach, Florida began receiving reports. This wasn't about money or banking. These were reports from parents and young women.
And this is where it gets difficult to reconcile the two versions of him. On one hand, he's flying to conferences. On the other, local police are investigating serious crimes involving minors.
According to the reports from that time, the police gathered a lot of evidence. They had witness statements, they found questionable items in his trash, they raided his home in Palm Beach. If you look purely at the police work, it looked like a very strong case.
So if the police had a strong case, why didn't the wealthy financier image collapse right then? Why was he still able to operate for so many years after that?
That's the big question, Lisa. And it brings us to the 2008 plea deal. This is probably one of the most debated legal events in recent history.
Can you explain what happened there for our listeners who might not know the legal details?
Sure. Basically, federal prosecutors had drafted an indictment, a formal accusation that could have sent him to prison for the rest of his life. The document was over 50 pages long. It detailed many victims.
That sounds very serious.
It was, but instead of going to trial on those federal charges, a deal was made. Epstein agreed to plead guilty to a much smaller charge in state court. He pled guilty to soliciting prostitution.
And the punishment?
He was sentenced to 18 months in jail, but it wasn't a normal jail experience. He was allowed to leave the jail 6 days a week for work release. He could go to his office for up to 12 hours a day.
That sounds incredibly unusual. Most people who are convicted of a crime do not go to their office every day.
It is extremely rare, and reports later showed that he wasn't really working in the normal sense. He was having visitors. He was still living a relatively comfortable life, and the most controversial part of the deal was that it gave him and his potential co-conspirators immunity from federal prosecution.
So basically, the deal said, you take this small punishment, and the federal government promises not to charge you or your associates for these crimes again.
Exactly. At the time, in 2008, this story was covered in the news, but it didn't explode the way you might expect.
Why do you think that was? Was it because of his influence, or was the media just focused on other things?
I think it was a mix of things. Remember, 2008 was the year of the massive financial crisis. The world economy was collapsing. The news was dominated by banks failing and people losing their homes. A legal story about a rich guy in Florida getting a light sentence. It was news, but maybe it got lost in the noise.
That makes sense. Context is always important. But the local newspaper in Florida, the Miami Herald, they didn't let it go, did they?
No, they didn't. And this is a great example of how journalism works. Years later, a reporter named Julie K. Brown started looking into that 2008 deal. She asked the question, why did he get such a light sentence?
And she started interviewing the victims, right? The women who were ignored back then.
Yes, she found them and listened to their stories. Her reporting, which came out much later, really changed the public perception. She showed that the legal system had failed these women. She exposed the details of the plea deal that had been kept quiet.
That shows the power of investigative journalism. It took years, but that reporting forced the authorities to look at Epstein again.
It did. Without that reporting, he might have stayed in that wealthy financier bubble forever. He had actually returned to New York after his jail time. He was still going to parties, he was still seeing scientists and academics.
That's the part that shocks many people. After 2008, after he was a registered sex offender, many powerful people still associated with him.
That's true. Some people cut ties with him, but many didn't. And this goes back to the media narrative. For a while, the narrative was he made a mistake, he served his time, it's over. His PR team worked very hard to rehabilitate his image.
They tried to make it seem like a minor legal issue rather than a pattern of abuse.
Exactly. They focused on his philanthropy again. Look, he gave money to this university. Look, he is supporting this research. It was a deliberate attempt to overwrite the criminal record with positive headlines.
But in the era of the internet and social media, it is harder to hide the past. The Miami Herald story went viral. People started asking questions. Who protected him? Who else was involved?
And that pressure led to the events of 2019. The federal prosecutors in New York opened a new investigation, and this time, the result was very different.
He was arrested at the airport, wasn't he?
Yes, Teterboro Airport in New Jersey in July 2019. He was returning from Paris. This time, the charges were federal, sex trafficking of minors. And this time, there was no bail. He was put in a high-security jail in Manhattan.
The media coverage then was massive. It wasn't just a side story anymore. It was the story. Every news channel, every paper. The mystery man image was gone. Now the image was predator.
It was a complete shift, and we also saw the arrest of Ghislaine Maxwell later, which we can touch on. But before we get there, we have to talk about what happened in that jail cell, because that event created a whole new wave of media narratives and speculation.
You mean his death?
Yes. In August 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell. The official ruling was suicide.
And that ruling, well, let's just say it caused a lot of debate.
Debate is putting it mildly. This is where media literacy becomes really difficult. You had the official report from the medical examiner, which said suicide. But then you had the circumstances. The cameras were broken, the guards were asleep, he had been taken off suicide watch recently.
It sounds like the plot of a movie. It is so suspicious that it is hard for people to accept the simple explanation.
Exactly. And this is where we see a split in how people process information. One group says, okay, the system was incompetent. The jail was understaffed, the guards were lazy, and he took the opportunity to end his life because he knew he was going to prison forever.
That's the incompetence theory. The system is broken, but it wasn't a conspiracy.
Right. But the other group looks at his connections. They look at the powerful people he knew, presidents, princes, billionaires, and they say he knew too much, he was going to talk, so someone silenced him.
The conspiracy theory. And honestly, Tom, when you look at the list of people he knew, it is not an irrational thought. It is not crazy to ask questions.
No, it's not crazy to ask questions. Skepticism is healthy. The problem arises when we accept a theory as fact without evidence. But the media fueled this too. Some outlets focused heavily on the conspiracy angle because it gets more clicks, it's more exciting.
While other outlets stuck strictly to the coroner's report, it really shows how you can live in two different realities depending on which news channel you watch.
Absolutely. And we saw this with the phrase, Epstein didn't kill himself. It became a meme. It was everywhere. It showed that the public did not trust the official story.
Do you think that lack of trust comes from the 2008 deal?
I think that's a huge part of it. People saw that the system protected him once. They saw that powerful people pulled strings for him before. So when he died in custody, they assumed the system was protecting someone again.
It's a logical leap. If they broke the rules for him then, why wouldn't they break the rules now?
Precisely. It's a crisis of confidence in institutions. And this is why the Epstein story is so important. It isn't just about one criminal. It's about how money and power can warp the legal system, and how the media sometimes helps cover it up and sometimes exposes it.
And speaking of exposing it, the story didn't end with his death. Ghislaine Maxwell was eventually arrested and put on trial.
Yes, she went into hiding for a while, but the FBI found her in New Hampshire in 2020. Her trial was fascinating because it gave us a look inside the operation.
We heard testimonies from the victims again, and this time there was a conviction. She was found guilty.
She was. She was sentenced to 20 years. In a way, her conviction was the justice that the victims never got with Epstein. It confirmed that there was a system, a pyramid of abuse, and she was right at the top of it with him.
It also confirmed that the financier image was a mask. The trial showed that their main business seemed to be this network of exploitation.
Right. But even with her conviction, there's still so many unanswered questions. People want to know about the client list.
Oh, the famous list. We hear about this all the time. Release the list.
And recently, more documents were unsealed, names were released. But we have to be careful here, too. Being named in a document doesn't automatically mean someone committed a crime.
That is a very important distinction. Someone could have flown on his plane or attended a dinner and not known about the abuse, or they could have been fully involved. We have to look at the evidence for each person.
Exactly. We can't paint everyone with the same brush, but the public is angry. They feel like the rich and powerful are still getting away with things.
So, Tom, when we look back at this whole saga, from the 1990s to today, what's the main takeaway for someone trying to understand the media?
I think the main lesson is always look for the source of the money and the source of the story. If a magazine is calling someone a genius, ask why. Who are their friends? And if police reports are saying one thing, but the public image is saying another, pay attention to that gap.
The gap between the image and the record. That's where the truth usually hides.
Well said. And also, don't let a story die just because the news cycle moves on. The Miami Herald proved that digging up an old story can change history.
That is a hopeful note to end on. The truth can come out eventually.
It can. Well, Lisa, this was a heavy discussion, but I think a necessary one.
I agree. It made me think a lot about how I read the news today.
Me too. All right, listeners, we're going to wrap it up there. We hope this conversation helped you understand the complexity of the Jeffrey Epstein story and how the media handled it.
As always, thank you for listening. Let us know what you think in the comments. How do you check your news sources?
Good question. See you all next time on Grandpa English Channel.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.